This is Elena from Birth High, and today I'm speaking with Heather about her three very different births. The first was a hospital delivery, the second, a birthing center water birth, and the third, a home birth, where baby came so quickly he was born on the hallway floor.
All right, so my name is Heather Currier. I live in Colorado. I'm originally from Canada, and first baby was born in California, and the next two were born here in Colorado. So we kind of started on the West Coast and moved a little east. My first pregnancy with my daughter, she's now 5.5, was in 2017, and it was planned, and the timing was great because I just found out that my grandfather was about to pass away. And so I flew home, but literally hours before I flew home to Nova Scotia from California, I did a pregnancy test and it was positive. And so I went home with this amazing news. I was at my grandfather's side as he passed away. It was beautiful. And I was able to tell him in person that I was pregnant and that I was expecting. All my family was really happy. So it was like this little nugget of really good news in a really sad time. So I remember that really distinctly. My family was so happy. Um, so I was working as a pediatric nurse at the Children's Hospital in Oakland, and I can't remember exactly when I was put off work. I'm trying to remember. I feel like it was around Christmas time, maybe. So I was about 3 or 4 or maybe 5 months pregnant. Sorry, it's been a little while. Um, and I was put off work because in nursing, it's very, very physical. And I was constantly on my feet, following doctors around, listening to rounds, having to stand still. And even not pregnant, I find standing still really hard. So I felt like dizzy. I felt faint. I felt like my legs were going to give out. And then eventually I started getting this pelvic pain. So I saw a doctor. She decided to put me on disability, which was really hard for me. Like I'm not someone that takes off work easily kind of person. I enjoyed my work. I loved my job. So that was challenging in and of itself, having to be home all the time. It sounds nice, but it got boring really fast. Um, but I tried to make the most of it. I was really present with my pregnancy. And then I was seeing an OB originally. So I was seeing an obstetrician because I thought, that was kind of what you should do. And my story is a bit different because I changed gears later in my pregnancy. But as a little backstory, before I was a pediatric nurse, I was training in labor and delivery and postpartum. So I have a lot of experience seeing deliveries, seeing what can go right and how quickly things can also kind of go wrong, quote unquote. Maybe you don't have the birth story that you anticipated, or something's wrong with baby and you have to be rushed to surgery. And so I was just trying to avoid that as much as possible. I did a lot of reading because, again, I was off work. So I would sit outside in the beautiful California sunshine and I would read all of these birth books. And then I heard about Ina May Gaskin. She's a like super famous midwife, like the best. And she wrote a book. Forgive me, I completely forget what it's called right now. Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, I think it's called. That book completely changed my course of pregnancy and deliveries for all three kids. And oh, hold on, my son's calling me. Yeah, Bubba. So I read Ina May's book, and this was like when I was, 25, 26, 28, 30, 32 weeks pregnant. And I'm starting to get this thought in the back of my mind, like, I don't know that I want to go the obstetrician route. I think I want to go the midwife route. And I couldn't quite commit to that because it's not the norm. I wasn't sure if it was safe. My mom, it was a labor and delivery nurse for 27 years. She has a very medical approach. I myself had a very medical approach, but something in the back of my mind kept telling me to pursue the midwifery and look into midwives. And so I did. I looked into it. We were in the East Bay in California, and so there were lots of options, lots of midwives. And I switched from an OB to a midwife at 33 weeks, which is so crazy. Like I did all the testing and everything with my obstetrician, and there was nothing personal against her. I just felt like I was more of a number to her. There wasn't that personal connection. I wasn't even sure she knew my name, and I kept imagining her at my birth, and it's not who I envisioned to be there. So I talked with my husband at length about this, and we finally decided to look into the midwives. So we found a birth center in Berkeley. Um, the name is escaping me again, but I can look it up. And I called them. They saw me. They said, "This is really late to switch, but we're not going to say no. We'll take you on." And so I went in and I met them. They did basically all the prenatals up until 33 weeks. They did like in one visit. I brought over my old records and stuff, which was really great. So I didn't have to do any further testing. And they were really great. They were from day one. They were so wonderful and warm and personable, and they remembered me. Even like I was only there once, and I walked in a week later, and they remembered me. They remembered my name. And then, so I, I started with their practice at 33 weeks, and they were at a standalone birth center, and you can deliver there within between 37 and 42 weeks. And if you're earlier than 37, you risk out and you have to go to the hospital. And if you're over 42, then you risk out just for safety's sake to keep mom and baby safe. So here I am at 35 and a half weeks. My husband and I go out to like a Benihana restaurant, and my water breaks in the restaurant. And it's like a freaking movie, where I'm in the bathroom and I'm like, what is going on? Like, I'm almost in denial that like it's clearly my water breaking. Like, what else would it be? And my brain is like, no, it can't be. Like, it was like so in denial. So I'm in the bathroom. I forgot my phone. I left my phone at the table, so I can't even text my husband. So I, pad up what I can, and I waddle out to the table and I sit down and I'm like, I think my water broke. And my husband's eyes, I remember they like bugged out of his head because I'm only 35 weeks and 6 days. Like, it's not time yet. And 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 I said, yeah, and I think I need to go back to the bathroom. So I went back into the bathroom, forgot my phone again. I didn't think to bring it. And so when I was in there the second time, I was like 100% for sure this is my water breaking. So I call out to a woman in the bathroom and I said, "Excuse me, I'm pregnant and my water just broke. Can you go find my husband?" And she's like, "Oh my goodness." So she ran out. She's telling all the servers, and the cooks knew in the back, and everyone in the restaurant knew what was going on. And so he came in and he got all my stuff for me, and we walked out to the car, and literally the restaurant is clapping for me as I'm walking out the door. It was so embarrassing. Um, so I get to the car and I call the midwives, and they agreed to see me. They said it really does sound like your water broke, but the only way to know is to test it to look for the ferning. And so we went into the office and they tested it, and sure enough, my water had broke. So then they said, unfortunately, you can't have your baby here, which made me really sad, but I was okay with it. Like, I never really had a really solid birth plan. I was really flexible, go with the flow. Here's the ideal birth picture, but we're also open to whatever comes. So we go to the hospital, and I'm in like the labor and delivery triage check-in area, and I'm contracting at this point. And she's got me on my back doing the monitor, and she's like, "You have to lay for at least 40 minutes." And laying on your back when you're contracting for 40 minutes was the worst. I mean, it was so uncomfortable. I don't like I didn't have any of my babies laying down on my back. I don't know how other women have done it. I don't know. It was so painful. And so the whole time too, I was begging the nurse to call the midwife because I asked if I could be seen by a midwife. And she said, hospital policy is only 36 weeks and above. Otherwise, it's an obstetrician. And I said, I'm 35 weeks and 6 days in 3 hours. Like, excuse me, it's one day short. Please just call her and ask her. And she said, yeah, 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 okay. And I was like, no, please just call and ask her. I wouldn't shut up about it. So she finally called and asked her, and she agreed to take me. So my first baby was a midwife delivery. It was in the hospital, but it was still a midwife delivery. And yeah, we went to the room. They kept having to check the baby's heart with the EFM. And otherwise, they were okay with me kind of getting up and walking around a bit. They had this pitiful little tub in the bathroom that no one had used probably in 5 years. And I filled it up and I got in it, and I was like crunched up in a ball, but it helped. The warm water helped a lot with pain control. And then I got back out, and then I crawled into bed, and by then the contractions were pretty strong, and I wasn't dilating as fast as I wanted to or as fast as they wanted me to. Which again, I think is one of those kind of triggers that can snowball into, them wanting to like artificially induce, maybe start Pitocin, stuff like that. And I just didn't want to do that because I feel like that's just a snowball and it can end in the OR. And so I fought back a lot on that. The midwife was super great, and they ended up giving me like a tiny dose of morphine just to kind of get me over that edge. And yeah, and then my first labor was only 12 hours total, which was pretty wonderful. My husband was there, our doula was there, and my family friend Janet was there because my family doesn't live close; they're all in Canada. And it was wonderful. It was harder than I anticipated, but also a easier than I anticipated in the weirdest way. Like, when she was actually being born, like in active labor, actually being born out of my body, that part was actually easier than I thought it would be. And so I remember as soon as she was born, we didn't know the gender. We decided not to find out. And I said, I want my husband to tell me if it's a boy or a girl. And so he did. He said, it's a girl, it's a girl. And he was so happy. And she came up on my chest, and she was just this tiny little thing. She was 5 pounds, 10 ounces, like as big as my forearm. She was so small and just so tiny. Um, and I guess those first few moments in the hospital, I remember her snuggling into my chest. I remember looking at her being in awe that she was my baby, because I had held so many babies before that and helped moms with latching and breastfeeding and all that stuff. And now I have this baby on my chest who is mine. And that was amazing. And I mean, you're just full of hormones, these love hormones. Like, you can't, I read after the fact that all of these hormones help to kind of dull your memory of the pain of labor, which I think speaks a lot about what I just said about, like, the delivery was easier than I thought. It probably wasn't, but in retrospect it was. Because I think those are the hormones in action, they dull your memory so that you'll have more babies, I think, is the, like, physiologic reason. And so she was just wonderful. I mean, she latched right away. They were checking her sugars a lot because she was early, a full month early. And her sugars were absolutely fine. She was nursing really well. She latched great. And so we were only in the hospital for 2 days, and it was over Easter weekend. And I remember that one of the nurses took the little hospital cap, and she like turned it into little bunny ears somehow. And it was so cute seeing this hat on her with these bunny ears. I think I still have that hat somewhere. And then we took her home, and she looked, oh my gosh, she was the tiniest little thing in her car seat. I mean, I had to roll up a swaddle blanket and wrap it around her head like this to, like, make her head stay still, because otherwise she was so small in that car seat. And then we got home, and it was just like this amazing feeling that I had done that. But in retrospect, I wish that I had laid in bed with her for longer and rested with her. Um, I do remember thinking, like, I don't know who I needed to prove it to, but I need to prove that I can get up and get back to life, and that the recovery isn't hard for me. And I don't know why I had that notion. It was ridiculous. So I remember 2 or 3 days, maybe 4 or 5, something like that. Days later, there was a memorial service for a family friend that had recently passed away. And it was just down the street. So we walked there. And there I am walking down the street like a quarter mile or half a mile, like 4 or 5 days postpartum. It's like, what are you doing, Heather? Looking back, I'm like, it's so silly. But it was fine. I felt fine. I felt like I wanted to, and so I did. And I don't regret it. But learned that lesson with my second and my third babies, big time. Yeah, just being with her at home was so much fun. My husband was really nervous handling her because she was so small, but he learned a lot of confidence through seeing me hold her. And I was able to teach him a lot, um, just about holding her, burping her, even, changing her. We had practiced changing a baby, but there was never a baby this tiny. right? Like the preemie diapers were huge on her. So it was fun, just such nice memories. My mom came out and then my mother-in-law came out and we were just surrounded by family and it was wonderful. So that's basically the story of how my daughter was born.
Oh my gosh, I love that. It's like so eventful and so beautiful, and I'm so glad you were able to have such a positive experience.
It was eventful, yes.
So then, at what point did you end up pregnant with baby number two? How old was your daughter and all that?
Yeah, what's funny is that, you hear these stories of women never getting their periods back for like 12 months, 18 months, and I was so looking forward to that. And 3 months postpartum, my period came back. Hi, buddy. So I am 3 months postpartum and my period comes back. And I couldn't believe it, and I was really like I was actually pretty upset. I'm like, "How this is not fair. This is so unfair." And, um, and then, I get my period in month 3, and then I get my period on month 4, and then month 5 postpartum, I didn't get my period. And I was like, "Hmm." So I took a pregnancy test, and I was pregnant at 5 months postpartum, which was not planned at all. So that's how we got pregnant with my first son. And I mean, it was such a joke in my family. They were saying like, "Geez, your husband sneezes and you get pregnant." So I do feel grateful that we never had the fertility struggle that I hear so many women and families having. Um, I feel like it was easy for us, and sometimes that does make me feel a little bit guilty in a way. But it just kind of makes me empathize with those families even more because that's got to be so hard. But yeah, so I was 5 months postpartum, 5-month-old baby, and I'm pregnant again. And so we at that point had moved to Colorado, and I have no family close by. My dad is down in Colorado Springs, which is about an hour away from us, but a little too far for like continual reliable assistance and care. So we decided that we would get an au pair. And we decided that about halfway through my pregnancy because I was having that pelvic pain again. And what it was like my SI joints and my pubic symphysis were all really, really loose and unstable, which is common and very normal in pregnancy, but mine was causing a lot of pain, like a lot of pain. And so I found sometimes walking even was really hard, and I like to get outside. I'm an active person. I need activity. I need fresh air. And I wasn't even able to walk a little bit like down the road and back, and that was hard for me in my pregnancy. Um so then we decided, yeah, that we would get an au pair. We had her come um the a couple of months before my son was born. So I think she's actually, that was the plan. We planned to do that, and then I remember she showed up, like, at the beginning of June, and he was born in the middle of June. So she was only here for, like, a couple weeks, and then my son was born. It was how it worked out. And, so we taught her everything with my daughter, with JoJo, like, her routines, and at that point, she was 14 months old, and as a preemie, she was pretty behind in her development in every aspect. Like I remember she didn't crawl until she was a year and a week old. Which was pretty normal, but it was hard for me as like a first time mom to be at the library and see these like 9-month-old babies like running and 9, 10, 11-month-old babies running around and she's not even crawling yet. So I think it's important looking back and now in retrospect, it's easy to say that we shouldn't compare our babies to anyone else's and that they'll come around and they'll develop at their own time. And she did. But so when the au pair arrived, she wasn't walking yet. She was just kind of crawling around. She certainly wasn't speaking yet. I think her first like indication sounds like with the pointing and the dis, like that kind of stuff started like around 16, 18 months. So she was very, very delayed in that stuff. And now she's 5.5 and she's great. She's in kindergarten and she's doing awesome. So it's like, all that stuff just doesn't matter. But so the au pair arrives, we train her on the JoJo stuff, and then one night I'm sitting in my bed and not feeling anything, but my dog is beside me. We have a chocolate lab and he at the time was 3, 3 or 4, and he jumped up on the bed, which he normally wasn't allowed to do, and he came right over and put his head right in my lap. And my husband was in the shower, and I remember thinking like, "This is weird," and I'm petting him, and then my husband comes out and he's like, "What's he doing on the bed?" I was like, "I don't know. He just jumped up and put his head in my lap." And so my husband shooed him off the bed, and he left for a minute, and then he came back and laid back down again and put his head in my lap again. And I looked at my husband and I was like, "Do you think he's trying to tell me something? Like, am I going into labor?" And then like an hour later, I kid you not, I got this massive contraction. And when they talk about the second baby coming fast, like that's no joke. This kid, oh my gosh, it was like he was in a race car. The moment he realized he wanted to come out, he was like, I want out right now." So I didn't have like, my water didn't break or anything like that with the first. It's like a completely different story. Um, my contractions started like from a 0 to 10. They started at like a 6. Like there was no workup. It was like, bam, I'm in labor. And so me being in denial, I needed to time my contractions, and I'm like leaning on the bed and I can't talk through my contractions, and I got the timer going and my husband's sitting back like, "We need to go. We need to go." And I'm like, "No, no, it's fine." And we were, by the way, I forgot this part completely, but I got my prenatal care at a standalone birth center here in Colorado, and they were absolutely wonderful. So again, with midwives, and with the second pregnancy, we opted not to do some of the testing, like for the Down syndrome and stuff like that, because we decided whether or not he was to be born with Down syndrome wouldn't affect our pregnancy at all. We wouldn't. It's not like we would terminate, so we just chose not to do it. I remember I did a lot less scans also, and I think that was just part of the midwifery model is that they do a lot less scans. Um, but I did do, is it 26 weeks? They do the anatomy scan, so that was pretty cool. And I always had to tell them like, we don't want to know the gender. Don't tell us the gender. And so certain times we'd have to look away at the wall and be like, they'd be like, "Okay, don't look," and we'd look away. um, and then so when I'm in this like in the throes of my labor, um, refusing to get in the car, my husband's like, "Heather, we need to go. We need to go." And so I call my midwife and she's like, "Yeah, you need to come in right now." And so we get in the car, and he, if I remember correctly, he was born, I think, right on his due date, plus or minus a day. I don't remember exactly, but he was like right on schedule. And so we're driving down, and I was excited that I was finally going to be able to birth in the birth center with midwives. And I had this vision of playing soft music and having candles and walking around the room and stuff like that, and eating and drinking and like nourishing myself. But none of that happened. I had one contraction in the car that I felt like I had the urge to push. And I thought, this baby is not being born in the car. And so I was fighting that really hard. Um, I think my husband was going through red lights and everything. It was like the classic story of like speeding through the red lights. And so we get there and they knew I wanted to have a water birth. And so we get there and they're still filling up the tub. It's only like a third of the way full because they're these massive tubs. And I get there and I like strip my clothes off and I get in the tub. And then he was born 20 minutes later in in the bathtub. So my second baby, his labor was 2 hours start to finish. And I mean, I was like after my daughter was born, it was shocking to have a baby on my chest, but this like happened so fast. And I just couldn't even believe. I was like, "Oh my gosh, we have 2 babies." So he was born in the water, which was my dream with JoJo also, but that didn't get to pan out. And the cool thing about the water birth is that when I got in, the I expected that the heat would help a lot with the pain control, but what I didn't expect was the pressure from the water helping to lift the baby helped way more. Like, I mean, it took my pain and discomfort down several notches just being in the water, which was so great. And I would advise that for anybody. Like, I'm such a fan of water deliveries. So yeah, so he was born in the tub. My husband was behind me. We were both like squatting in the tub, and he was born. And when he came out, he had a nuchal cord, like the cord was wrapped around his neck, but I think it was like 3 times. So my midwife was so skilled that because it's so funny. I watched it happening and like my nurse brain knew what was happening and I knew the baby was in danger and I knew this wasn't a good situation. But my mom brain was thinking like, oh, I have a baby. Oh, he's so healthy and he's so perfect. It's like these split minds. And I just like, I couldn't make sense of anything. So it's just, you kind of just ride it and go along with it. Um, she left him under the water, and like, as you know, the babe doesn't try to breathe until he's out of water, and then he'll take his first breath. And so she left him under the water, and this all happened in the span of like, I'd say like 7 seconds. But she's like flipping him all around and untangling the cord and pulling it from around his neck, and then she brings him up and puts him right on my chest. And it takes him a while. It's like 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and he's still not crying, and 30, and I'm like, maybe it wasn't that long. Maybe it just felt like that long. And I noticed that he was a little like dusky, but I was thinking like, again, my mom brain was thinking, this baby's so beautiful, he's going to start crying anytime now. Like he's just, give him a minute, you know? And then next thing I know, the midwife and the nurse come over and they have the tiny little ambu bag that they put on his face. And they did a little resuscitation just to give him his first couple breaths, just because he had that kind of rough start. After that, he coughed a little bit and then let out this epic cry, and he was great after that. So it was like a little scary, those first couple moments, but she was just such a pro. I mean, she was completely unfazed. Hey, bud. So his first few moments were a little scary, a little nerve wracking, but then once he started wailing, we knew everything was fine. The other thing I didn't anticipate with the water birth, um, was how almost violent it would look afterward. Like, I mean, the water was bright red. It almost felt like we were sitting in a bathtub, like of just blood. And it doesn't bother me because I have a nursing background, but my husband was thinking like that's a huge visual of how much blood I'm losing. And I think that was hard for him. We talked about that after the fact, and he wasn't expecting that. So, yeah, the tub was definitely full of blood, and I got out of the tub right after he was born. I still held Lyle to my chest, and oh yeah, we didn't know if what his gender was either. And then so when he was born, she's doing all these tricks, and then she puts him right on my chest, and so we still didn't know. And so we didn't actually know if he was a boy or a girl until after he started crying. And then we pulled him away and we could see that he was a boy. So, but you just don't care in those moments. So we knew we had a boy. I held him close to my chest. They helped me out of the tub, and I remember I walked over to the bed, and then that's where I delivered the placenta, and everything was just so smooth. Like I remember they brought me trail mix, and the M&Ms were so good. And I was drinking like apple juice. It was just everything with sugar was like my senses were so heightened. Everything was so good. And he latched beautifully. He was just absolutely perfect size, if I remember correctly. And I have 3 kids now, so don't quote me on this, but I think he was 7'10" or 7'13", so like perfect size. And so their policy at the birth center, which is so great, is that they only keep you for 2 hours after your delivery, and then they send you home. And so, because if you have a healthy baby, there's no reason that you need to be in a hospital. There's no reason you need to be monitored. They obviously follow up closely. Like the next day they call you, and I think, no, I'm sorry, the next day they come visit you in the home, and then the following day they call you. So they're all over you. It's not for lack of that they don't want to check in. It's more that this is a natural process. Our bodies know what to do. The baby knows what to do. So if everything goes well, there's no reason to be somewhere other than home. And so I think I went into labor around 9 or 10 at night, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong. And then we were home by 3 or 4 in the morning with a new baby. Like it was, I mean, he came so fast, and then we only had to stay there a couple hours. And I remember too, they left the room, they dimmed the lights, they said, why don't you guys all get some rest? And my husband had Lyle on his chest, and those two were fast asleep. They fell asleep in like a second. And I was just laying there so full of hormones and like adrenaline, and I was vibrating, and I was just laying there staring at them for 2 hours straight. Like I couldn't sleep. I was so hopped up on hormones. But when we got home, we settled him into bed with us because we did co-sleeping for the first 6 months with all of our babies. And I nursed him, he fell asleep, and we all fell asleep, and it was just so beautiful. And I remember in the morning, we have pictures of this, but my daughter came out from waking up in the morning, and we kept telling her there's a baby coming, but she's 14 months old. It's like, what do you actually understand? And she was on the bed and she was just staring at this little baby, and she was so happy. And she was really, really into it. She was loving on him. And then she like suddenly was done, and then she left. Like it's like, okay, I'm over it. And then she went and played in the living room. Um, and then those two are, because they're only 14 months apart, Jojo and Lyle are inseparable. They are such good friends. I never would have planned to be pregnant 5 months after I had Jojo. Like, I don't know if anybody would be. But the way that it worked out, it was so great. And they're so close. And it also worked out really well as they grew up together also, because they could be in the same swimming lessons, they could be in the same tennis groups, they could be in the same reading group at the library, things like that, because they're so close in age that I always kept them together. So in a sense, it was almost kind of like having twins, except I didn't have the twin birth and the twin pregnancy and all that stuff. But yeah, they are so close now. They're 4.5 and 5.5, and they're just like best buddies. So that's been really cool to watch. And yeah, what one lesson I took from my first delivery was I had mentioned I felt this need to get up and move around and like prove to somebody that I could do it. With my second baby, I refused, and I said, like, hard no, I'm going to be in bed with this baby for 2 straight weeks, and you guys have to figure it out. And we had family here. My husband's a champion. He's like the best dad. And we had the au pair. So we had lots of support. And I literally laid in bed with him for 2 straight weeks, and we did nothing but like bond and nurse and just love each other. And it was so wonderful. I have such nice memories from that. So I always like to tell people that, like, if you can, always choose to do that, because it was so wonderful. I still remember that.
That is so amazing, Heather. Wow. Gosh. All right, so baby number three, how did this one come about?
Yeah, so baby three was planned. We I as soon as I could after my second was born, I had an IUD put in, because I was like, I'm not doing the 5 months postpartum pregnancy again. I want a little control over this. So when we decided it was the right time, which it doesn't really ever feel like the right time, to be honest, but we said, like, you know what, if we had a third, we could handle it. So let's just do it. So I had my IUD removed, and I think we were pregnant like within a month. Um and so the birth center where I had Lyle had shut down while I was pregnant with Alex, with my third. And which was really sad. It was like these insurance reasons, and I don't really know the full story, but I was really sad to not be able to have those midwives anymore. So I did a bit of research. I went to see one midwife. I signed up for her care, and then a couple weeks later, I decided, I don't know, the fit doesn't feel right. And it was again like going with my gut, trusting my gut, and I ended up switching to a different midwife, or midwifery. Wow, I can't think of the word. Midwifery, I don't want to say company, but this team, that they were two midwives and they worked closely together, and so they got to know you really well. Like they knew you by name. There were only two of them. They had a or a student midwife with them as well, and who was fantastic, super curious, really great, great learner. And they were just wonderful. Man, my prenatal care with him was so great. I loved going down to visit them because they were just so welcoming, so nice. And they really care too. I had the exact same issues with my third pregnancy as I did with my first and second, was that pelvic pain, the pubic symphysis, the SI joints, all of it was just so painful. Um, and they were very supportive and just loved on me through that whole process. The pregnancy itself was pretty unremarkable as far as I can remember. I'm sure my husband would remember more details than I do. Um, but we didn't know the gender again. We chose not to know. And actually, if I was starting to bend on that, I tried to ask my husband, you know, we did the surprise with the boy and a girl. Should we just find out what this one is? And he was like a hard no, absolutely not. And I was like, yeah, okay, I don't want to either. I was just asking. But if he had said yes, I totally would have found out. I think I was just kind of over the waiting. But of course, when you do wait and then you get that surprise, I think it's so beautiful because as adults, we don't get surprises like that ever. And so it's like one little thing that you get that's like a massive surprise. So we did wait. Um, my labor with him was way different than the other two. I mean, how different could you get? These three births were so different. So again, when you're delivering with midwives, you can risk out if you're earlier than 37 or later than 42 weeks. And so Alex's due date came and went and like no sign of labor. And then it was like 40 and a half weeks and then 41 weeks. And I was getting antsy because I was thinking like, I don't want to risk out from having a midwife birth again. And the exciting thing with these midwives is that they do home births. So we had planned to do a home birth with Alex. It's almost like I had to work up to that, but I always loved the idea of doing a home birth. But having that medical background, there was like this little voice that kept telling me like, it's not safe, it's not safe. And then by the time I had my third, I was like, midwives are super capable. They are so smart, super intuitive. And I trust them with my life. I trust them with my baby's life. And I know that if there's any kind of issue, they won't even hesitate to call an ambulance and get me to the hospital. And that was their policy, like and they reiterated that if we ever have any doubts, you'll go to the hospital. If you need pain control, we'll take you to the hospital. So they have all these policies and protocols in place for that. So yeah, we had this like plan for a home birth and we were so excited. We had this big inflatable birth tub in the living room that we set up. And because my water birth with Lyle was so great, I was like, I want to have another water birth. It was so great. So, but Alex wasn't coming and he still wasn't coming. So I went to see them. They did a membrane sweep. Nothing happened. And so I went to see them again. And I think they did a second sweep and then they recommended castor oil. And I talked to my sister-in-law about castor oil. She had a castor oil induced delivery also ages ago. And she's like, "Oh, I have nothing but bad memories of how it tasted." And like that was her focus of like how it tasted. And so I was thinking, well, it can't be that bad. And so we go and pick up the castor oil. And I remember the midwife said, take it with a huge meal, like have a huge, like carb heavy meal. So I think my husband made like, oh, he made mac and cheese. I remember he made this big like mac and cheese casserole. And he's like, eat more, eat more, eat more, and like pushing this on me. So mac and cheese casserole. And then I took the castor oil, which you mix in orange juice. And it was hands down the most disgusting thing I've ever drank in my life. And it's like, it wasn't the taste, but the texture for me. And for months after I had my baby, if I would be baking and I'd have like milk in the bowl and I'd add oil to it and you could see how it separates, I would start to gag. It was like this visceral reaction to seeing oil in a liquid. I just couldn't. It made me so nauseous. Because that's what it looked like. It was like a glass of orange juice with oil in it. Naturally, it took me a long time to drink orange juice again. But I drank the castor oil, and about a few hours later, so basically how the castor oil works is it's like a laxative and it kicks your bowels into like completely emptying. And in the process, your bowels, as they're being stimulated, they release prostaglandins, which is the initiator for labor. And so that's how the castor oil works. It just like causes all this irritation in the abdomen and it like kickstarts your labor, basically. So I had this epic bowel clean out and I was like back and forth to the bathroom. And then sure enough, my contractions started and it was like magic. It was actually really cool. I do remember the hours in between taking it and then having the symptoms though. It was like I was watching the clock and I remember we were watching like this baking show or something silly on Netflix and everyone was really into it except me. And I was like, I felt like I was separated from the whole situation. Like I was just waiting and like time was going so slow for me. It felt so surreal. Um, and then, yeah, I started having symptoms. I started having contractions. and then called the midwives, and then they showed up a little while later. They like to let you just labor naturally at home, which is pretty great. You know, they obviously check in and they want to talk to me to see how I sound and everything, and they're not very far away. And then at a certain point, they decided that they should come, and I can't remember when that was, but probably when, I couldn't speak through my contractions and stuff like that. So I was laboring in the tub some, and then I'd get up and I'd walk around, or I'd go lay down in bed. So they had a setup in the tub, like beside the tub in the living room, and they also had a birth setup on my bed. And so I could give birth basically in either spot, which was kind of great. So I was kind of going back and forth, and the labor was getting more and more intense. The contractions were getting really hard, and finally this part gets a bit graphic, but the midwife decided that she was gonna like literally take matters into her own hands, because I wasn't dilating as I should. The shape of my cervix made her feel like something was funny with the baby, like not the baby's health, but like she was suspecting that he had like a hand or something up, or some that was her like initial thing. Like there's something weird that's not his head isn't pushing on the cervix like it's supposed to. Something strange. So I mean, talk about the most painful experience of my entire life. She digitally spread my cervix apart with her fingers in the middle of a contraction. And I mean, these contractions are like 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. They're so strong. And I have to lie on the bed again on my back and contract on my back. And it's like agony to do that anyway, let alone having her spread apart my cervix with her fingers. Um, and so she did that through as many contractions as I could handle, is what she told me. So it's like she just wanted to do it until I couldn't handle it anymore. And so I think we made it 3 or 4 contractions, and that was all I could do. And got up, walked around a bit, and then she checked me again, and there still wasn't proper dilation. So she wanted to do it again. And so we did it again. It was really awful. um, but then right after that, I said, I have to go to the bathroom. Like, I feel this pressure. I feel like I have to go to the bathroom. And in the back, again, it's like the two minds. My nurse brain was like, duh, Heather, you're about to push this baby out. But my mom brain was like, no, I just need to use the bathroom and I'll be able to get back in bed. And so the nurse brain was right. I went to the bathroom. I did have like a large BM because I was cleaned out and my bowels were still really irritated. Um, and so I did use the bathroom. Then when I'm on the toilet, my water breaks. And then it's like game on, like we're having a baby right now. I was like, and I kept thinking like, I am not gonna have my baby on the toilet. I'm not gonna have my baby on the toilet. But I couldn't move. It's like all your energy is in between your legs and you can't even make your legs work, and nothing is computing, and all of your ounce of focus is on what's happening with your birth. And so I managed to get myself off the toilet, and I was leaning on the bathtub, and trying not to push. And the midwives are trying to encourage me to come out and, can you walk? I'm like, absolutely not. And so I crawled out of the bathroom on my hands and knees, and I laid down on the hardwood floor in the hallway. And that's where I had my baby, was on the floor. Because because you can't plan your deliveries. You just can't. You have this plan, like I can do it in bed or in the tub. Oh, that's great. No, I'm gonna have him on the floor, right in between the 2 spots I'm supposed to have him. So I lay down on my side. Before I get down, they managed to put at least a towel under my head, but I didn't even care at that point. Um, it's I'm like completely naked. We have the air conditioning blowing on us, super cold air, and the midwife's like, "Oh gosh, we have to turn that off." And my husband ran to turn it off. I was like, "Leave it on!" And like I turned into this monster because I was so hot. It felt so good. So the poor midwives had to deliver this baby with this cold air blasting in their faces. And they were just champions, man. Like one of them ran to get the stuff from the living room. She brought it in, and the other one stayed with me the entire time because this baby's coming. And I'm lying on my left side, and I remember I kept thinking, I need to lift up my right leg. I need to open my pelvis and make space, but nothing. I had no control over my body at all. And she kept asking me, like, can you lift up your leg? And I was like, no, I can't. I can't. I really can't. And so I had a baby with my legs closed, which I never even knew was possible, but I guess it is because I did it. And out he came, and then so I have all these pictures of me laying on the floor with this beautiful baby boy on my chest, lying on the hardwood floor in the hallway. And the funny thing is that I had this like masking tape on the floor of like in the living room, I had a starting line for the older kids, like they did like a race. So there was a starting line and a finish line, and the Alex was literally born like on the finish line, which is so. I look back, I was like, oh, that's pretty funny that he crossed the finish line and we were done. So it's really cool that he was born in our home. Like every time I go through that hallway, I think about it. Um, Afterwards we got up, got into bed, got a little more comfortable. And I delivered the placenta. Everything was fine. He was a great weight. Again, he's my third, so I really don't remember. I think he was 813 though, so he was a big boy. Um, and it turns out what happened was the reason that my cervix wasn't contracting or dilating as it should have been is he was kind of hanging out like this. So he had his elbow up. And so the top of his head wasn't pushing on my cervix. It was more like this part. And so that's what made it so intense. And he was kind of, so my labor pushing him out was actually really hard. I don't really remember it. It's all like this fog, but I remember that was hard because he had this arm up around his shoulder. And he was born, he was fine, absolutely great. And the midwives were wonderful. And they came back the next day and checked on him and made sure that he was latching and breastfeeding and everything. And we just, postpartum, it was wonderful. I took those days again to bond with him in bed like I did with the other two or my second one. Um, I forget how many days we were in bed, but I think it was a little less than 2 weeks though. And it was just so wonderful to be. That's my favorite memory, I think, of my entire life is being in bed with my brand new babies and just like me and them. And it's daylight, but your shades are down. So it's like diffused light and it's like nothing else matters. Those are my favorite memories. And that's exactly what it was like with him. And so yeah, that's my birth story with Alex. I mean, all three of those stories are so different. I don't think they could be any more different, but I wouldn't change anything for the world. And I'm such a lover and supporter of midwives.
Oh my gosh, Heather, I have like chills from listening to all three of these, but wow, what amazing stories. Oh my gosh.
Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't believe he was born on the floor. I'm like, seriously?
They come when they come, you
That's
know?
that's it, man. You just have to be so flexible. It's like you have to just take what comes and just go with it.
So true. Well, I feel like you covered everything so well. But is there anything, I guess, from any of your pregnancies or births or postpartum periods that maybe you didn't touch on or I didn't ask about that you want to include?
Um, I guess maybe a bit about the breastfeeding. With my first, so with all three of them, I had this plan to breastfeed for a year. And again, I was flexible. I'm like, if it's less than a year, it's fine. Like that's my goal. I'm not going to beat myself up about it because I know some things can happen and, you don't make it to your goal. Um, and things did happen. So I got part of the, being pregnant at 5 months postpartum is that around 7 months postpartum, my milk started to dry up because my body's like, we're growing a human, I need these resources down here, not up here anymore. And so she we switched her to formula, which took a long time for her to switch because we had this naive thought that like I'm never going to have to train her on a bottle. We're not going to practice. She doesn't need to. I'll just nurse her forever. Like looking back, I'm like that was so silly because you just don't know. And then here we are in the situation where we need her to take a bottle because her weight gain was like plateauing and her health was at risk. Um, and it finally ended up being that I couldn't even pump enough out. So I was trying to pump too because I didn't want to switch her to formula. But in the end, like fed is best. It doesn't matter how they're being fed as long as they are fed. And so we switched her to formula, and the pediatrician recommended that we get this like big, wide open nipple for the bottle and blend, blend the formula with a banana and some cinnamon, like literally make her like a smoothie at 7 months old. And that's how we finally got her to switch to the formula because she wouldn't switch like from breast milk to formula. She just wouldn't do it. And so it was this long, tedious, like weeks long process of doing that. And then eventually, we cut out the cinnamon, and then eventually we cut out the banana, like a little by little. So she was only getting formula. Man, she was hard though. She was our hardest baby by far. She was so difficult. And that's just one example, like just patience and perseverance. And then with my second, with Lyle, when he was born, we made it to about 6 or so months also breastfeeding. Um, and I learned my lesson with Jojo, so I started teaching him on the bottle around 4 months. I started introducing the bottle with breast milk, and he quickly realized that he got the milk a lot faster out of the bottle than he did from the breast, and so he just kind of gave up on it. He stopped nursing, which was really hard for me. I wasn't ready for that. But he was just done. And so I was like, okay. So and then I pumped for I think 3 months after that. But then I don't think pumping is sufficient. I think eventually your body's like, "This isn't a baby," and at least that's what happened with me, and my milk supply started going down and down, and I was one pumping session, I might get 10 ounces, and then weeks later, I might get 8, and then weeks later, I was only getting 6 ounces, and then like 4, 3, 2, and finally, I was only getting drips, so I'm like, "Okay, this is futile." Um, so we switched him to formula, and he took formula the rest of the year, the rest of his first year. And then same thing with Alex, actually. I think he realized again that he was getting fed a lot faster from the bottle. Um, and so he protested the breast and was ready for the bottle like way before I was. So I had this idea with all three of them that I would do 12 months of breastfeeding, and I got 6 to 7 months out of it. And it's like, you know, life happens. You just have to kind of go with it and accept that, even though, like, if you asked me before I was ever pregnant, like, no, I would never give my baby formula. Like, ew, gross, And then it's like at the time, like, I need my baby to eat something. So then you're like, oh, thank God for formula. It's amazing how your mindset can just shift.
Totally, yeah, yeah, fed is best for sure.
Hmm.
Well, Heather, just to kind of wrap us up here, I always like to ask if you have like any resources or things you kind of live by. I know you mentioned the Ina May Gaskin book. Anything else that you really found helpful during any part of your journeys?
Yeah, the Ina May Gaskin book again was like the game changer that completely changed the trajectory of all my pregnancies and deliveries. Um, Several other books as well. Birthing from Within is another great one. Um, I'd have to look up the titles of the others, but I was literally reading every single midwife book that I could get my hands on. I was listening to podcasts. I was like, and with was it JoJo's pregnancy, I think, or maybe no, it was Lyle's pregnancy. So my second pregnancy, he was breech, and I was about 30 something weeks, and he was still breech. And so spinningbabies.com was really helpful for us. Our midwife recommended that. We were doing this crazy thing where I'd have my knees up on the couch and my elbows on the floor, and this towel under my hips, and my husband's standing up over me, like pulling the towel, like pulling my hips back and forth, and basically like trying to like rock the baby to twist him. And it did work actually eventually. I don't know. I thought I would notice when he turned, but I didn't. He just kind of did it on his own. So that was a really helpful resource for us too. Um, what else? I would really recommend a doula, a birth doula for the first baby. Um, we had a doula for the first and second babes, mostly for my husband, because I felt like I could probably handle whatever got thrown at me, but I was a little worried about him. um, so she was there. She was a wonderful support for him and for me also. But she knew that her role was mostly to support him through everything. And so she was just wonderful. I recommend like a birth doula. I heard a lot of great things about a postpartum doula, but that's not something I um, ever really thought would be beneficial for us. I think because with both, we had au pairs, we had in-laws coming to stay with us, but postpartum doulas I've heard are amazing too. But yeah, birth doulas are such a great resource. I mean, they're just there solely to help you have your baby. So that's always been a huge recommendation of mine too.
And where did you find your doulas?
So I start by searching like doulas near me is how I like would Google it. And then the list comes up, and then I would open a new tab and find her name and put the word review afterwards. And then you find like actual moms' reviews about their experience with them. And then I kind of would interview them, and I think instantly you get a feel of whether or not it's a good fit. At least that's how it happened for us. But you have to ask important questions and also explain to them what your birth looks like, what your ideal birth looks like. Like, so for me, a lot of mine was really out of the box. Like for the second one, I want a water delivery. I want it with midwives. I want it at a freestanding birth center. I don't want to be in the hospital. I don't want doctors near me. So it was all very different. And she was totally great with that. She's like, "Oh, I've delivered there before. I know the midwife's there. Like, we're great. Let's do it." I was like, "Perfect." So you kind of get a sense, even over like a Zoom call. And then I think the next step is that they come to your home, you meet them one on one, they walk through like the questionnaire and stuff with you. So that's pretty much the system I use to find our doulas.
That's great. Well, I think that's all the questions I have today. Is there anything else that we should touch on before we part ways here?
I don't know. I don't think so. Um, Trying to think of anything. Not really. I mean, I one thing that comes to mind is that I did have this complication, and I think it's from having the two pregnancies back to back. But I had a pretty severe like diastasis, which is like when your abdominal muscles separate during pregnancy, which is normal, but then they don't go back. They don't close up after pregnancy. And so it leaves like a thin wall of almost like cartilage where there should be muscle. So eventually I got two hernias in there, and I could kind of like right above my belly button, there were two kind of lumps, and they were very, very small because I pay attention to stuff like that. I was a little worried that that would happen. And so just in February, I had surgery for that. I had a hernia and diastasis repair. And it's much better now. It's so much more stable. But yeah, that was one complication that I ran into after having three pregnancies. And I was a little worried actually being pregnant the third time because the diastasis never closed up. I was seeing PT, and it might have closed up like half a finger width, which is kind of how they measure it. It's by like finger widths. It was after pregnancy, it was about 4 finger widths wide. So like it was my abdominal muscles were spread apart 4 finger widths, and then it only ever closed to about 2 or 3. So yeah, that was one complication I ran into after pregnancy. And again, I think if you are kind of flexible and kind of take it on as like, this is kind of normal and let's just get it fixed and move on instead of kind of fixating on it and being really sad or depressed about it, I think that really helped too. Um, just with my mindset, because that was the first surgery I ever had in my life, actually. It was in February. Um, so yeah, that was the only real complication I ever ran into with my pregnancies and my postpartum period.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I think that's a really important one to make note of. So just one clarification here. How far postpartum were you when you conceived your third?
I could think about that. Lyle was born in June of 2018, and Alex was born in September of 2020.
Okay.
So I guess I was a year and a half,
Okay.
something like that,
Yeah, can do the
roughly.
math.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I'm like,
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Heather. This has been absolutely amazing. Thank you, Heather, for sharing your story, and to our viewers for watching. If you have a birth story you'd like to share, visit www.birthhigh.com and click Share Your Story. We'll see you next time.